Hello and welcome back to Big Brand Energy. Today I'm going to talk to you about what it's like to feel like you're outgrowing your brand. This is something that I have recently experienced and I've been wanting to speak on the podcast about because I've been riding shotgun with many clients and friends over the years who have gone through this very thing. And I feel like from an outsider's perspective, it's one thing, and then to actually experience what it's like is a total different thing. And I feel like being in the position of a coach who is helping their clients kind of realign with their brand or their content, and also being the friend to many people in business who are like, does my content even make sense? Does this reflect me very well? All those questions. And then now also having experienced my very own version of, I don't know what it is. It's got to be like some sort of like mid-brand crisis. It's like you've started your business, you had an idea of one way it was going to go, and then you grow rapidly as a human, or you get a whole lot of clients, or you grow rapidly as a brand or business, and all of a sudden you're like, wait, what do I do? What do I even offer? Am I still offering the same thing as I once did ages ago, and all the things? So if that resonates with you, then stick around and listen. I'm going to speak a lot about what I've been going through with On Track Studio and also building kind of the mentor coaching side of my business. So if you're interested, stick around, and honestly just stick around for vibes anyway, because we're going to have a little bit of fun. I kind of have also, as a side note, I have just decided that solo podcasts are elite. I used to be so scared to get on mic alone and just talk to the camera or talk on the microphone, riff off. And there used to be like all of this pressure on having a solo episode and being obviously a podcast coach and having a studio where people come in and obviously record. I know we all feel this way. Everyone is so scared to just like hold the conversation with themselves the entire time. And for the people who are listening and have never recorded a podcast before, just know it is challenging. It's super hard to be able to sustain so much energy and just like not go off on a tangent when you're up here alone. But for me, I think for the podcasters listening, just honestly break through that barrier of like all the reasons why you can't do it and push through, because particularly if you're in a service providing business, sort of if you're a creator who ultimately wants someone to buy from you and you provide a service or you do coaching or anything of that nature, it's the fastest way to get someone to know if they like you, right? Because you don't have anywhere to hide. You've only got yourself to kind of showcase in these episodes. And what I've found is through solo episodes for myself, but also for my clients, the return on investment of time is just tenfold. So people will come to me, be like, I listened to your podcast about XYZ. They'll literally quote the title. I listened to your podcast on that. I really want to work with you. And I'm like, wow, it's so interesting because, you know, you just doubt yourself so much. You're like, do I even make sense up there? So yeah, anyway, I just wanted to sidebar that note, because once you push through the pain, it's actually really fun. And now I'm just like, you know what, cruisy. I'm just going to chuck on the old camera, chuck on the old mic and just like record. And so, yeah, I guess you'll be hearing a lot more from me because of that. So, okay, I'm going to take you back to basically when I first started On Track, right? It was very much a side hustle. It was a podcast studio a portable podcast studio, if you will. Many of you may know the story where I updated my intro, which involves the story where I literally put my Rodecaster, which is the equipment we use to record all the audio and everything. I put it in a laundry basket and I would just take it from client to client, all 2 clients or 3, I think was me peaking back then. And I would just drop it off and they would use it, and then I would collect it and I would export all the files and edit them all myself. And that's basically how I started On Track, right? It was very much, yeah, you can just imagine. I was working full time as a marketer. And I think for the first year of business, even when I was full time as like, you know, a podcast studio owner, I really identified myself as a marketer still. You know, my prime goal for anyone I work with is to build their brand. So I feel like, you know, as time went on, I was very attached to this whole identity of being the marketing girl, and therefore felt like just talking about podcasting wasn't strong enough. And because, you know, to my core, I do believe that you can have a really strong brand without a podcast. I believe that exists, but I also believe that the easiest way to cut through the noise on social media, or when you're starting a business, or when you're, you know, trying to get clients or anything like that, is through a podcast. So I just basically was like, oh my God, like, you know, Big Brand Energy as a podcast, let's just start there. Initially, it was all about how do you stand out online. By no means was it about specifically podcasting. It was all about, you know, if you've been listening for a while, you know, I've talked about content. I've interviewed people, all kinds of different people, about how they actually cultivate big brand energy. And, you know, I just got to this point where I'm like, fuck, like all my content creation is around just like broad marketing. And I'm out here being a podcast coach. And I'm like, knowing what I know that I need to, like, in some ways niche down and talk specifically to podcasting, because these are the people I ultimately want to help now. While I have the knowledge in marketing and can technically help anyone, my business now is centered around podcasting. So it's just like, whoa, like I don't know what to create content on. I don't know what offers to launch, because I just feel like I'm pigeonholing myself and all of this stuff. So that's sort of where my, you know, mid-brand crisis started to rise. It was like, okay, does this make sense to people? Does it make sense to me? The reason I bring that up is because I feel like this is where it begins for all of us, right? We actually decide that our audience don't understand what we're talking about anymore. But the reality is we just don't understand where it all fits. So when I realized that the problem I was facing had a lot more to do with me than it did on my audience, literally everyone I would run into, or the DMs or messages about my podcast, were still coming through all the same. But I'm like, second guessing it all. I was just like, you know what, I'm going to stop creating content for a moment, and I'm just going to spend time going internal and working out what is my big vision. Like, what do I actually want to create with Big Brand Energy, the podcast, also my business at large? Where do they overlap? What does it all mean? And it was in that process that I realized that I will always be more than just a podcast coach. Like, I love podcasting and I could talk about it till the cows come home. Like, all of my friends will tell you that. But I also love spirituality. I also love self-development. I also love marketing in general. These are the things that actually fill my cup up when I'm talking to literally anyone. And being someone who is stepping into more of this personal brand on Instagram, for example, it actually gets to be like, instead of having to like fit everything into one thing and trying to make sense to everyone else, all I need to do is actually stop criticizing myself for trying to take up space in all areas. And I don't know whether that's going to make sense to you right now, but what I would say is, I think just generally speaking as people, our ego just craves labels. We really like to be able to put ourselves in a category and be like, I'm this, I'm that. And it just like, it soothes us. So the moment you're like, oh, my business does this, like for me, I do coaching, I do production. I, for a very long time, was still doing freelance marketing for selective people, doing shoots and all the things, becoming whatever anyone wanted me to be. And it wasn't until I was like, wait a second, I can actually integrate all of this knowledge gets to make sense for my clients. I literally bring in so much mindset work with my one-on-one clients, because that's how I, you know, coach myself. Like, everything that I do makes sense to the big picture that I'm building. And when I was like, oh wow, I just need to give myself permission to actually like not have to show up on my podcast and be super value centric. Like, the person listening to this, I know that you're not here because you want to start, launch, scale your podcast. You're likely here because you have an interest in what I talk about. You might have an interest in me, and getting to know what actually goes on behind the scenes is probably a super valuable thing for you to know. Because I went to a party on the weekend and I hadn't seen a lot of the people in a long time, and they came up to me, they're like, so if you're killing it, like, get it, queen, you know. And it was super nice, super supportive. But I'm like, holy shit, if you even knew the like turmoil I'm in for, you know, most of my weeks. Like, I have really good in place in order to like get myself into the right position to be able to show up as as a boss bitch, like as a leader for my team and as a leader for my clients. But there is so much that goes on behind the scenes that I'd love to speak to, because I feel like it's important to take people along for the journey. I literally find myself spiraling sometimes because I, haven't meditated and all those things. And it's not until it's too late that I'm like, fuck, I've not meditated in ages. No wonder I'm struggling. So I firstly just wanted to point out that, like, even though it may be perceived as I'm making big moves, which I totally am, there is also stuff behind the scenes that I'm like, I'm nurturing heartbreak. Well, actually, I'm not really, but these things kind of happen. Like, I've got, family dramas. That's a good one. Like, I have so much family drama going on most of the time, and I'm like, wow, I just need to, show up for that, take a step back, recenter, come to work, be a creator. I really find it difficult to be a creator and also a business owner. And I think a lot of people do as well, because sometimes they don't overlap, right? The person who's sitting in front of you right now or in your ears right now, she's had a deep breath. She's here to just like provide value to you, tell you stories, all the things. But when I'm in my boss mentality, I'm not in a position where I can just like relax and tell you stories and things like that. So just normalizing that for any business owners listening. But yeah, so basically I'm now going to like go back to the tangible stuff here. So basically, when you're feeling overwhelmed by everything that you've got going on in your life in terms of business, my biggest piece of advice is to stop, go away, sit down. Personally, I literally just disconnected for a bit in terms of social media. And I was like, okay, what is the one thing I want to be known for? And it was during this time I was like, you know what? To be honest, I want to be known for making massive impact with your content. That's what led me to podcasting, all the things. So I was like, okay, cool. That gets to be true. And then I started to reintroduce the content that I do like to consume, them being podcasts, because she's on brand. Basically, I was listening to these podcasts and I noticed how they were showing up on their podcast. And I'm like, why do I not embody anything that I like in the people that I consume? For example, one podcaster I like always speaks about her spirituality, her journey, all of these things. But I, for some reason, made that not accessible for me, because I was like, well, Sophie, like, no one cares about spirituality in your audience. They actually only care about what you have to say about marketing, which is blatantly not true. Like, we have conversations in my DMs all the time about, someone saw that I was doing the corrective culture cleanse and they were like, I'm doing it too. So like, I know that my audience are super aligned with literally everything that I have going on in my life, and the things that they don't align with get to be true too. It doesn't mean that they're not going to be listening in and enjoying my content if they don't meditate or eat organic. Like, I know that's so true, but I feel like, this is again a permission slip for the creators and the podcasters out there who are feeling like putting all this pressure on yourself to show up with really structured, masculine, this is what I have to offer, this is what I'm talking about in this podcast, when in reality, people actually do just want to hear from you. Like, things that I take my clients through when we're working one-on-one is basically, I have come up with this term called audience-centric marketing. And I feel like it's one of my biggest point of differences that I offer within my programs and within my one-on-one containers, right? Because a lot of people will tell you to create content that serves you. So coaches will sort of say, you need to be creating content that communicates what you do, how you do it, all the things. And that's what's going to bring audiences in. I actually disagree with that. I believe that you need to create context. So the first thing I do with my clients is like, let's create context of who you are. And that's where you get to speak about yourself in a storytelling way. So you're not throwing your offers up against someone and being like, this is what I do. You're actually just educating and like speaking freely about who you are, what you do, and inviting people to listen in. And through storytelling, which is essentially what good marketing involves, you get to build a personal brand along the way of like building valuable content. The valuable content that we create as podcasters or as business owners, to me, the main difference between what others preach and what I preach is that I put the audience in the center of what I'm creating. So there would be no part of me that would come up here and vent to you about a boy that broke my heart, because I know that you're not going to you might get value out of it, but it's not a valuable piece of content for you that aligns with my brand, right? I'd much rather speak about the overwhelm of putting out content and the things that like us as entrepreneurs are facing, because that is aligned with A, what I talk about, but B, you're actually going to get something out of this. Like, I am thinking about you first when I create content, and I think it's super simple for me to do that. But for many others who don't have the marketing training or don't have the experience in creating content like I do, struggle to prioritize that fact, and it's actually what's stopping them, right? So with that in mind, when you are feeling overwhelmed by your own brand and you don't know where to go, you don't know what content to actually start creating, the one thing I suggest to do is to take a step away, as I did, but then when you come back in, be intentional with the content you're consuming and just pop on the lens of, what am I enjoying about this content? Are they fucking fired up? Is their energy super high? Is their energy super relaxed? Am I watching reels? Am I watching TikToks? Am I listening to long form content? What is the method and what am I enjoying? Because the truth is, you want to be creating content that you like to consume. That is what you will base your content from. But then you come to a coach like myself and you say, okay, this is the content I like. This is the style of podcast I like to listen to. How do I put my unique point of difference, what I want to bring to the table, in a packaged up way that serves my audience first and cultivates that sort of giving nature? That is what basically I do with clients. And what you can start to do is to identify what it is you like to listen to or what it is that you like to consume. And then through that lens, be like, okay, how can I serve my audience? Now, this might sound super simple, but when you actually go and try and execute for your own brand, particularly when you're like, who am I? And you're going through this like mid-brand crisis that I think we all at one stage as entrepreneurs will go through, it can be really difficult. So that's where personally I leaned on my coach. Like, I was like, okay, well, what makes sense? And you know, having that person to basically reflect these things to you, makes it a lot easier. So that was basically what I did as a first step when I was like, okay, what does this look like? Funnily enough, the podcast thing for me, creating a really good podcast, I have so much pressure on this podcast because I'm like, not only am I a podcast coach, have a podcast studio, I kind of feel like I need to be at some sort of level with my podcast. And I just realized, if my client came to me and saying like, I'm feeling pressure about the content I'm creating, I would be like, where is that coming from? Because guess what? It's got nothing to do with what your audience is expecting of you and everything to do with something that happened to you in childhood that pretty much you learnt you need to be a certain way. You need to be perfect. Essentially, I'll share mine. So like, I learnt back in the day that I needed to be perfect in order to be worthy of people's time. So this is getting into quite deep self-development / spiritual work that I've done. But essentially, when you are working with the inner child, when you're working with trauma on the body, I might actually get my trauma coach to come in for an episode. If you guys are interested, let me know, because I think it would be really powerful for anyone, literally anyone, to hear about how, you know, things happen in our lives. We mentally, intellectually are so past them, but our body actually stores them. And it means that when we get triggered, so with things in business or when you're creating content, usually when you're triggered, it's got nothing to do with the thing. It's got nothing to do with feeling like you can't actually create content or feeling like you're not putting good content out there. It's got everything to do with back in grade 3 when someone told you XYZ and you decided that meant that you weren't good enough. And having this, I don't know, I guess like balance between the strategy of what I know to be true about podcasting and marketing, and also like the internal work that I do behind the scenes, literal trauma work, inner child work, shadow work, self-development, just in general. I'm very much always growing, like always changing. My priority of my health, and that being mental, that also being physical, are all things that I think are underrated when and I'm talking to the coaches and the entrepreneurs out there who are building brands, right? Totally different if you're a Nike, if you're a company and you've got support with people around you and the brand is an archetype that, you can segue one person into the graphic design team and the show goes on, right? It's totally different being a person who sells a service. You actually are essentially your brand, or your brand is an extension of you. And when you're trying to form clarity, you need to be able to identify how much of you actually want to share and how much you don't want to share, but also what's the reason you don't want to share? Is it because you're fearful of what people think? Or is it because you genuinely have a boundary around that topic and you don't wish to share it? Because that's totally fine. But for me, the candid chats like this, it was purely based on fear that people listening don't care. And yeah, I guess having this conversation with you right now is me just rejecting that, now taking the action forward in spite of having that fear. And you watch how much of a shift will be taken in my world, because when you are genuinely moving forward and creating content, and I've done this before, obviously in all different types of content, but never specifically for my podcast. And every single time when you actually just create the content that feels super aligned and authentic to you, it's magnetic. And that's when all your biggest desires actually get to come true. So yeah, basically I just want you guys to know that if you are feeling like stuck with your brand, stuck with your content, stuck with what it is you even offer, that is super normal, and full permission to just stop for a moment, get clarity over 3 things: what it is you offer as a business, what impact you want to make or what you want to be known as, and what you're willing to share in order to tie those things together. Because at the end of the day, the more storytelling you have within your content, the easier that tie gets to be, because you don't have to sit there curating the perfect way to communicate this thing, right? You can just speak from experience, and it's actually really empowering to do so. And it's actually super good content too. How much more relatable is it when people just speak candidly? There's no bells and whistles. You just get an insight into what's actually going on. There's been a huge shift in, I don't know whether I can say a specific industry, but certainly I see it across the board with what certain coaches are telling businesses. There's this energy of relatability isn't actually worth it when you're creating an audience. I flatly reject that. Relatability is the very thing that actually makes, your audience really buy into what you do. I cannot tell you how many times I literally just before this podcast recording, I was on the phone to someone who reached out to me to become a podcast, what are they called? A podcast, one-on-one podcast client with me. She's started a podcast and to work with me one-on-one to grow her show and all the things. We were on the phone going back and forth. I asked her how she found me. She said that she found me from one of my other clients who basically she follows, and she was the reason she started her podcast. She said, I wanted to start my podcast because I saw that you were coaching this woman, and I consumed her content and fell in love with her. And, I've bought from her, I've bought her programs. I love everything that she's about, and I want to be able to cultivate that within my audience. And I'm like, yes, queen. It's because that person was able to get behind a mic and show the humanness of her that allowed that kind of buy-in from this other person. And then I get the benefit from it too, because she's obviously found out about me through the podcast, et cetera, et cetera. It's this beautiful, abundant way of growing business and growing audience when you get on board with the relatability factor. I think a lot of coaches decided that it wasn't cool to be relatable because they felt like they were being alienated by their audience, right? So when coaches keep leveling up and, making more money, all the things, buying designer bags, they realize that their audience are no longer in that same, let's say, salary bracket. So they had to normalize for themselves. They're like, let's normalize not being relatable to our audience. That's why that narrative started, in my opinion. And I disagree. I believe that they are still making massive impact within their audiences because their audience relates in a different way, right? Obviously, there's some part of these coaches' stories that the people who are buying from them relates with, and that's why they buy. But yeah, people disagree with that completely. So it's interesting. I'd be interested to know what you think on that matter, like whether you tend to buy from people that you relate with, or not even buy from, like consume content from people that you relate with, or do you like that unattainable, unrelatable goal? Because correct me if I'm wrong, because I'd love to hear that feedback. But for me, I'm all about the relatability, not only because of myself and that self-awareness, but also because I'm trained in marketing, right? Like I know that marketing strategies are all about compelling people through relatability. So I'll leave that with you. I probably should wrap up this episode, even though I could genuinely keep chatting for days, but I actually am going on a wellness retreat this weekend. So that's fun. And I need to go and pack my bag. I need to go buy disposable cameras. And what else do I need to do? Yeah, mostly just pack my bag and get ready because I'm just going to relax. I'm going to have a whole weekend off work, which I haven't done in a little while. I've been very in my hustle, in my healthy hustle, as I like to call it. Like sometimes when you're just absolutely lit up by what you're doing, you get to just hustle and that gets to be healthy. Another thing I'm normalizing. But to be honest, because I've been doing that for the last few weekends, I'm just keen to just switch off and just relax, exercise, eat well, have fun with everyone there. So that's what I'll be doing. This episode will probably be going live after the retreat, so you would have seen it on my stories. Anyway, I will leave you guys to have an incredible evening or morning whenever you're listening to this. Please let me know how you like this episode. And also, if you're interested in finding out how you can get clarity on your brand in order to launch your podcast and feel really good about the content you're putting out there with your podcast, please get in touch with me because I've got a lot of programs in the works, and also one-on-one coaching is always an option for you. But until next time, everyone, enjoy your day.